What if the person you trust most becomes your greatest threat? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that someone you should feel safest with, someone you confide in, might one day turn your world into a nightmare. In the heart of New York City, in one of the most unexpected corners of the bustling metropolis, this very reality unfolded in the most gruesome way imaginable. This is the story of Serena Brooks, a woman whose life was shaped by secrets, trauma, and a twisted desire for control. On the outside, she was just another face in the crowd. An ordinary woman who worked a typical job and lived in an ordinary apartment. But behind her facade, something dark was brewing. It wasn't long before the cracks began to show, and when they did, they led to a crime so horrific it would send shockwaves through the city. In the early hours of a cold March morning, a woman's descent into madness reached its horrifying climax. Serena Brooks, with her troubled past and seemingly perfect life, would betray the very man she claimed to love in the most unimaginable way. How did this seemingly ordinary woman, with a troubled past, commit one of the most horrific acts of violence ever seen in the city? This question, once asked, is impossible to forget. What drove Serena to such a level of rage? What pushed her to a place where love and hate, passion and madness became indistinguishable? Serena's crime was more than just a murder. It was a brutal act of possession, a twisted ritual that left her victim mutilated and his life stolen in the most brutal of ways. His name was Johnny Price, a man whose life was tragically cut short by a woman he never saw coming. For days, no one suspected the horrors lurking beneath Serena's calm exterior. She was an everyday New Yorker. But all of that would change in one fateful night, when the person who once held Johnny's trust would betray him in the most unimaginable manner. How did it happen? What pushed her to the edge? How did she go from an ordinary woman living in a bustling city to someone capable of a crime that would haunt New York for years to come? This is the chilling story of Serena Brooks, the woman who skinned her lover in New York City, and the disturbing truth behind what drove her to commit one of the most shocking crimes the city has ever witnessed. Stay with us, because the nightmare is just beginning. Before we dive deeper into this story today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this journey, and give this video a thumbs up. Your support keeps us going and allows us to share these gripping stories. And remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episodes. New York City, an epicenter of ambition, dreams, and sometimes nightmares. It's a place where millions of stories collide, where the bright lights of Times Square cast long shadows in the alleyways, and where the hum of city life often masks the darkness simmering beneath the surface. In this vibrant metropolis, stories of hope and heartache coexist, but not all of them have happy endings. In one of the city's quieter corners, the Upper West Side, an unimaginable crime unfolded, one so chilling that it would leave the residents of this peaceful neighborhood haunted for years to come. At the center of this tragedy are three people: Serena Brooks, the woman whose life unraveled in the most unimaginable way; Johnny Price, the man who unknowingly became the victim of an all-consuming rage; and Detective Samuel Diaz, the investigator tasked with unraveling the mystery behind the crime. Each would find themselves caught in the web of a story no one could have predicted. Serena Brooks was a woman whose life had been defined by secrets. On the outside, she appeared ordinary, a quiet, seemingly harmless figure among the bustling crowds of New York City. She had been in and out of relationships, each leaving its mark on her in ways most people couldn't see. As she entered her relationship with Johnny, she thought she had finally found stability, or at least control. But when Johnny tried to break free from her grasp, her sense of control shattered. What followed was a chilling act of violence that would change the lives of those involved forever. Johnny Price, on the other hand, was a man who had lived through his own struggles but had always tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. A blue-collar construction worker from the Bronx, Johnny worked tirelessly to support his family. He met Serena in a Midtown Manhattan bar in the late 90s. What began as a promising relationship soon turned toxic, and Johnny's efforts to distance himself from Serena's increasingly violent behavior would ultimately lead to his tragic death. As the investigation began, the police pieced together the horrifying details of Johnny's final moments. But the person who knew the most, the one who held all the answers, was Serena herself. But would she be willing to tell the truth, or would the silence she left behind keep the city guessing? Detective Samuel Diaz, the seasoned investigator, was called to the scene when Johnny's co-workers grew concerned about his disappearance. What he encountered at the crime scene was beyond anything he had expected. A brutal, calculated murder that seemed almost too horrific to be real. But Diaz wasn't easily shaken. Determined to uncover the truth behind Serena's actions, he would delve deep into the mind of a woman whose descent into madness was both horrifying and heartbreaking. This case would not only leave a scar on the lives of those directly involved, but also spark a conversation about the dangerous undercurrents of violence, the psychological toll of trauma, and the fine line between sanity and madness. This case became one of the most chilling true crime stories of the year, sparking discussions on violence, mental illness, and the hidden darkness lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. As the investigation unfolded, the city began to ask itself, how could someone like Serena Brooks, seemingly so ordinary, commit such an extraordinary act of violence? What did this crime reveal about the hidden fears and anxieties that sometimes drive people to the edge? To understand how a seemingly ordinary woman could commit such a horrific crime, we must look deeper into Serena's past, a past shaped by neglect, violence, and emotional turmoil. Born in the heart of New York City, Serena's life began in a broken home where stability was a luxury she would never know. Her father, an alcoholic, was often consumed by rage triggered by the smallest provocation. Serena's mother, unable to protect her children, was emotionally distant, a silent victim of her own right. Serena, caught in the middle, never knew what it felt like to be safe. Her father's violent outbursts and her mother's inability to shield her from them shaped her worldview and how she would view relationships with men. From a young age, Serena learned that love wasn't something to cherish. It was something to control, manipulate, and hold on to at all costs. Her first experiences with men were not filled with affection but pain. Her father's cruelty and her mother's failure to protect her made her grow up too fast, too angry, and too distrustful of the very people she should have felt safe with. Her innocence was stripped away far too soon, and as she grew older, that same need for control became entrenched in every aspect of her life. As an adult, Serena's relationships were doomed from the start. She had never learned how to love without manipulating, how to trust without fear, or how to give herself to someone without taking something in return. Men, to Serena, were either tools to be used or obstacles to be destroyed. In 1998, when Serena met Johnny Price, it was in the unlikeliest of places, a Midtown Manhattan bar. The flashing lights, the thumping bass, the clink of glasses. It was a typical New York night. Johnny, a construction worker from the Bronx, was looking to unwind. Serena, though, was different. She had an air of mystery, a quiet intensity that piqued his curiosity. Their first encounter was simple, a few exchanged glances, a drink, a smile. There was something magnetic about Serena, something Johnny couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't like the others he'd met. No, she was calm, composed, but her eyes told a different story. In the early days of their relationship, things seemed easy. Johnny was drawn to Serena's beauty, her confidence, and her independent nature. She wasn't like other women he had dated. She seemed to understand him. For Serena, Johnny was a breath of fresh air, someone who didn't try to control her or make her feel small. But beneath that tranquil surface, something darker was brewing. Their relationship, like many, began with moments of warmth and happiness. They spent weekends in Central Park, visited small cafes in the village, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of New York. But slowly, cracks began to form. At first, they were small, tiny red flags Johnny dismissed as growing pains. Serena began calling him incessantly when he was out with friends, questioning who he was with, where he was. Johnny tried to reassure her, but Serena's behavior became more erratic. She would show up at his work unannounced, accuse him of flirting with female coworkers, even when there was no reason to suspect it. Johnny tried to brush it off. Maybe it's just her insecurities, he thought. But as weeks turned into months, he began to feel the weight of Serena's emotional dependency. The phone calls turned into confrontations. The confrontations turned into arguments, and those arguments often ended with Serena in tears, begging Johnny not to leave her. Their love, once effortless, became suffocating. Johnny's attempts to pull away were met with aggression, guilt trips, and threats. "You're the only one who cares about me," she would say, her voice trembling with fear and intensity. "If you leave me, I'll have nothing left." But it wasn't just emotional manipulation. One night, after an argument, Serena snapped. In a fit of rage, she grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened Johnny, slashing dangerously close to his face. He managed to dodge the blade, but the message was clear. Serena was willing to take things to an extreme, and Johnny was trapped. Trapped in a toxic, violent relationship that would ultimately lead to his death. While you're enjoying this gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. The days leading up to that fateful night were filled with increasing instability in Serena and Johnny's relationship. Tension was building. Serena's jealousy became all-consuming. Johnny tried to break free, but every time, Serena would pull him back with emotional manipulation and threats. Her behavior had become erratic. One moment, calm and collected. The next, consumed by rage. Johnny noticed the change but felt powerless. He walked on eggshells, afraid to set her off. It's a chilly March evening in New York. Johnny Price arrives home, unaware that it will be his last night alive. Johnny had worked a long shift, eager to relax. But as soon as he entered their apartment, something felt different. The familiar surroundings now seemed suffocating. Serena was waiting for him, her eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made his heart race. She had been drinking, and Johnny could smell the whiskey on her breath. He tried to stay calm, but Serena wasn't listening. She had overheard him talking to a female friend on the phone earlier in the day, and it had pushed her over the edge. "You think I'm stupid?" she spat. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Johnny was taken aback. It was nothing, just a friend. But Serena was consumed with jealousy. She moved toward him, fists clenched. Johnny, now realizing the danger, stepped back. "Serena, calm down. I don't want to fight." But calm was the last thing Serena wanted. She lunged at him, grabbing his shirt, forcing him into a fight. Johnny pushed her off, but it wasn't over. In a split second, Serena grabbed a knife from the countertop, an imposing butcher's knife, and swung it at Johnny. He dodged, but the knife connected. Blood poured from the wound. Serena didn't stop. The attack was relentless, and Johnny's attempts to escape were futile. He ran toward the door, but Serena chased him down the hallway. Johnny reached the door, but Serena grabbed him from behind, yanking him back into the room. She stabbed him again and again, over and over. The horror of what happened in that apartment reverberated throughout the city. What had started as a typical evening for Johnny Price had turned into one of the most grotesque and chilling crimes New York City would ever witness. And yet, the nightmare was only just beginning for the people who were left behind, trying to process a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Serena Brooks, after the crime, remained eerily calm. Her arrest was swift. She was found sitting quietly, covered in Johnny's blood, her behavior almost detached, as though she had committed the unthinkable but couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of her actions. When the police arrived, she claimed repeatedly that she couldn't remember what had happened. She was disoriented, confused, and disassociated. But the scene told a different story. Forensic evidence was irrefutable. Serena had not acted in the heat of a moment of rage. She had carefully planned and executed a brutal act, using the knife with precision, skinning Johnny's body methodically, and cooking his flesh in a chillingly calculated fashion. The details of the crime, as they emerged, sent waves of shock through the community and the media. Her defense, led by her attorneys, was that she had been mentally unwell, that the trauma of her past, combined with severe emotional and psychological issues, had led her to a breakdown. She claimed she didn't remember the crime, a defense that would be crucial in the case to determine her mental state at the time of the murder. Experts would later suggest that Serena suffered from borderline personality disorder, a condition marked by intense mood swings, unstable relationships, and a deep fear of abandonment. Her childhood trauma, growing up in a violent home with an abusive father, was likely a contributing factor to the instability she faced in her adult relationships. But despite the diagnosis, the evidence was clear. This wasn't just a case of temporary insanity. As the trial moved forward, the defense team tried to argue that Serena was a victim of her own mental illness and traumatic upbringing. They painted her as a woman who had suffered in silence for too long, unable to cope with the emotional scars left by her father's abuse. However, the prosecution countered that Serena's actions were not those of someone driven by a fleeting moment of madness. They were the deliberate actions of a woman who had become consumed by her need for control. The chilling way in which she carried out the crime, methodical, calculating, and disturbing, suggested a level of premeditation that made the idea of temporary insanity seem implausible. Serena was eventually found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Though some felt sympathy for the woman who had suffered so greatly in her own life, there was no escaping the horror of what she had done. The news of Johnny Price's death stunned the community. Johnny was a quiet, hard-working man. A man who had made a life for himself despite the challenges he'd faced growing up in the Bronx. Those who knew him couldn't understand how something so brutal could happen to someone like him. He had worked hard his whole life, loved his children, and treated everyone with kindness. His co-workers at the construction site were among the first to express their shock and sadness. They had known him as a man who always showed up, who was dependable and caring, and they couldn't fathom that he had been taken in such a brutal and senseless way. A friend recalled, "Johnny was one of the best guys I knew. He didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Neighbors, too, were left in disbelief. Serena had always been an enigma to them, quiet, withdrawn, and seemingly reserved. She hadn't been a fixture in the community, but no one had imagined the darkness that had lurked beneath her calm exterior. One neighbor described her as a woman who would smile politely but never really engage with anyone. No one could have imagined that the woman who lived next door could be capable of such violence. Social media exploded with outrage as the details of the crime began to surface. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Johnny and hashtag End Domestic Violence trended for days, as people across the city and beyond expressed their disbelief and horror. Some focused on the failure to address mental health issues before they escalated into violence, while others expressed deep sympathy for Johnny's family. The city was left in shock, not just from the brutal nature of the crime, but from the realization that someone so close to Johnny, someone who should have cared for him, could be capable of such a horrifying betrayal. The case also sparked a much-needed conversation about mental health awareness and domestic violence. Experts began discussing how Serena's childhood trauma and her struggles with mental illness might have influenced her behavior, and what could have been done to intervene before it was too late. There were calls for better mental health resources and more attention to the early signs of abusive relationships. As the case unfolded in the public eye, experts weighed in on the psychological factors that may have contributed to Serena's actions. Dr. Karen McAllister, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma, offered her insights during an interview. Serena's need for control in her relationships, particularly with men, likely stemmed from the powerlessness she felt as a child. When Johnny attempted to assert his independence and autonomy, she saw it as a direct threat to the only control she had ever known. Dr. McAllister went on to explain that Serena's borderline personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder were significant factors in her ability to rationalize her extreme behaviors. Serena had been exposed to years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her father, which left her with a skewed understanding of love and affection. She was emotionally scarred, unable to trust or feel secure in a relationship. When she felt rejected, she reacted with destructive intensity, unable to differentiate between love and control. Mental health experts also pointed out that Serena's paranoia and jealousy, which had escalated in the weeks leading up to Johnny's murder, were classic signs of the disorder. These behaviors, combined with her lack of emotional regulation, were a ticking time bomb, one that eventually exploded with fatal consequences. The case became a flashpoint for discussions about the stigma surrounding mental health. Many people wondered whether Serena's actions could have been prevented with better access to mental health services and early intervention. Could someone have noticed the signs of her deteriorating mental state? Was there a way to help her before she caused irreparable harm? For Johnny's family, the loss was unbearable. Johnny had 2 children, a daughter and a son, both of whom were just entering their teenage years. They had always known their father to be loving, dependable, and protective. To lose him in such a brutal and senseless way left them devastated and heartbroken. The grief they experienced was beyond words. How could they ever come to terms with the fact that he was taken from them in such a horrific manner? In interviews, Johnny's sister recalled how close she had been with her brother. "He was my best friend," she said, tears in her eyes. "He didn't deserve to die like that. He didn't deserve to have his life taken in such a violent way." Johnny's children, too, struggled to make sense of it all. The thought of their father's brutal death, the way he had been attacked, mutilated, and violated, was a pain they would never fully escape. Friends and family members were left to mourn the loss of a man they had admired and respected. They couldn't fathom the pain he must have endured in his final moments. They felt the shock of his loss deeply, and the questions surrounding his death, how could this have happened, haunted them. As the case came to a close, one question echoed through the minds of everyone who had followed it. What went wrong? How could a relationship that had started with so much promise descend into such a horrific tragedy? Could anyone have predicted the violence Serena would eventually unleash? The brutal death of Johnny Price is a tragic reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you least suspect. People who are capable of blending into society, of wearing a mask of normalcy while hiding something darker. Serena Brooks may remain behind bars for the rest of her life, but her crime will never be forgotten. The story of what happened that night, and the events that led up to it, have cast a dark shadow over the city she once called home. New York, a city full of energy and light, was forced to confront the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. Johnny Price's death was not just a tragic ending. It was the beginning of an important conversation about the dangers of unchecked mental illness, the scars left by childhood trauma, and the devastating consequences of relationships built on manipulation and control. Serena's story will haunt New York City for years to come, and Johnny's memory will serve as a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control, how one person's rage and pain can destroy everything in its path. What do you think could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Could someone have intervened? Could the signs have been spotted earlier? If you found this story compelling and thought-provoking, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more true crime stories. Like this video if you want to see more content like this, and share it with others who might be interested in understanding the complexities of human behavior and the heartbreaking consequences of unresolved trauma. Stay tuned for more chilling true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.